I'm really looking forward to today. I'm going to just start by a very brief introduction to the topic, and then maybe we can just do a quick introduction because I don't know that everybody knows everybody else here. And then I've known John for at least 10 years, maybe more. Had the opportunity to not only have many good, interesting conversations, but also to work together on a fairly large client project for a couple of years and think about how do we apply many of the things that John is going to talk about tonight in real world situations. And that balance between very kind of conceptual abstractions and real world applications has been a real fertile ground for this kind of exploration. And I know John has kind of delved deep into, as you were saying, Mike, adult development and leadership, but also delved deep into the world of the artistic practice and sense making, and how do all these worlds come together? This is the really exciting thing that we're going to hear about this evening.
Okay, so I'm Mike. I'm based in the south of France, in Marseille, where I work as a coach and in service management specifically, and have done for 20 years now. And I'm here because I can't remember when, as John said, but I just had a recollection of spending some time on a train with John, and we had a lovely conversation, and which I've thought about a couple of times since even. And so when I saw his name on the invitation, I thought it would be lovely to see him again. He always has something interesting to say.
Wonderful. Les, and then Rose.
So, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, everybody. Les Linklater, I'm the VP for People in a global oilfield services company. I met Jonathan, I think, about a dozen years ago, maybe something like that. Got involved with Tom and the Prometheus probably 2 years ago. And when this popped up on LinkedIn, it was a very timely reminder that I need to, let's say, re-engage with my own development, just as a bit of a health check.
Great. Okay, Rose and then Barrett.
Good morning, everyone, or wherever you are. I'm in Canada, Ottawa, the capital. I do consulting, leadership, organizational development. What piqued my interest about your session, John, is this connection of artistry and sense making. I'm at heart an artist, but of course my mind always goes to the sense making, and maybe it's a bit of both. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Great. Barrett and then Micah.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm sending regards from Berlin in Germany. I'm a professor for business administration, and I'm very interested about the intersections between business and the arts. And I did the research on that matter and tried to integrate that in my teaching. And I enjoyed a lot of conversations with John, and wondering what sense making might be. And we had a intersection there because I did some work on, or tried to figure out what term art thinking might mean, and we came to the conclusion that that might be some kind of sense making. So I'm thrilled to listen to you both.
Great. Micah and then Jamie.
Yeah, hello. I'm also from Germany, from Freiburg, so the southwest corner of Germany. I know Jonathan for decades, I would say, or at least a long time when I was in organizational development. Now I have retired and I'm researching into what does the transformation into rewirement mean. And actually I'm writing this from first person and integrating artistry, so poetry, into it. So that was what attracted me to today. Thank you.
Great. Jamie and then Uta.
Hi, I'm new to the John fan club. We've had some conversations on LinkedIn. I'm an interdisciplinary artist and a somatic movement therapist. And a lot of my work is bringing more embodiment into the world. Oh, and I'm in the Hudson River Valley of New York.
Ah, cool. Uta and then Tom.
I have to slow down a bit just to speak from my intuitive motion. Though, thank you for the invitation. I'm here because John invited me. I'm engaged in a research project in developing creativity and consciousness. And I met John in a conference on this topic in Broughton 2 years ago. And I was thrilled by using witnessing how we are processing, how we are expressing, how we are embodying new information through a relationship. And that's why I'm here in engaging in deep listening. Thank you.
Great. Tom.
Yeah, so I'm my other name is Prometheus. I'm Tom, and I live right now in Antibes, France, or I'm in Chicago, the USA. And I've actually always known John through Jonathan, but I've never been able to actually work through more closely with what his thinking is. But I do. What I'm hoping to explore is a couple things. One is the distinction between what Nora Bateson, who was a guest a couple sessions ago, might call warm data and cold data, as I do believe that many people mistakenly think truth is only empirical, and I really believe that a lot of our knowledge and our understanding of things is more artistic than that, or needs to be. And I find it's interesting, the embodiment piece, because we think and see and form our consciousness, spiritual and physical levels. It's interesting too. We had Mark Bradford, who's a Aikido artist, and his thing is that much like I think John's visual arts has led him to these insights, Mark's experience in Aikido has led him to the insights around how the movement helps us communicate, how bodily movement helps us understand and communicate. So those are my perspectives for today.
John, what might you say about you? Because I know you have like an aerospace engineering background. You have could you give us a little, very short overview of your background?
Yes. So, well, thanks everybody for your introductions. And this is like a 4-year milestone to celebrate this sort of moment in my own developmental edge in such great company, and with the amazing conversations I've had with many of you. So my background is in technology, and at 18 years old, being immediately employed on a management track for a large aerospace company. But I read a book called Small is Beautiful by E.F. Schumacher, and it revolutionized my life and took me into the social sciences in an NGO. So I've been heavily influenced by the sort of anthropological social sciences, although I've not been quite able to sort of completely get away from my technical background, going back into industry at various points. But in 2008, I created a consulting brand after an MBA, where I heard Dave Snowden was a lecturer of mine in 2000 at my MBA school. And again, a kind of a life-changing moment, because narratives and sense making, that's where it all started for me. So I'm using the anthropological hat in sense making primarily, and broadening it out with this artistic dimension being only the last 4 years that I've really sort of given myself the permission to commit to an artistic practice and absorb that into my previous lives.
We're going to have John kind of lay the foundations for what he's trying to bring together to offer us a kind of scaffolded platform to have a deeper conversation. And that will involve a few slides and engaging us in some kind of conversation. I have the liberty to interrupt him periodically and ask some questions or highlight or connect to some things. We started talking a few days ago and realized we should stop and save it for when we were actually here. And then we're going to stop and have a breakout session, and we have a kind of creative way to set up which kind of topic or theme you might want to go into a breakout in. And then we'll come back from that and just start processing what are people hearing. And from that, John will maybe offer another layer of things to engage us further. And the further we go, the more we improvise.
Slides that I have are based on my experiments in an artistic practice. So I'll be leaning on the imagery and as one of my kind of mantras in the last 4 years, connecting to soul and connecting beyond the verbal. So I'll go directly into the first slide, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Okay, great. So this actually is one way of showing you the presentation plan. This image with the sort of network connectivity is where I feel, and Jamie, the embodied practice, these are now the sort of instinctive experiments. It feels like even this presentation, preparing for this presentation, it's like a hyper object where the subject and object boundaries are just so interwoven. And my kind of TED Talk equivalent could be any one of those points on the outer edge. But I can't help but find myself swimming in the interconnectedness, and I'm no longer in a sort of a hierarchy of themes. So anyhow, my presentation may feel a little bit like this, but I'm really excited to tease out some of those primary colors in the conversations as we go ahead. I've got two ideas that I'd like to develop in the session this afternoon. So the first is this hypothesis of the arts at the leading edge of human evolution. And this is one of my artworks of a collage looking at the evolution from the very bottom left-hand corner and trying to track and trying to get a sense of the movement of the arts in the highest kind of macro sense. So I'll be using some references which kind of give some fascinating evidence as to where the arts leads on the human edge. So this idea, number one, is what is the role of the arts in our poly crises today? And then the second idea is more around sort of the grammar and the language. And I'm finding it very helpful for me to even sort of share what I'm doing with other people who may be thinking I've gone completely on a tangent in these last 4 years professionally. But the notion of moving from the arts to artistry is helping me a lot, because the arts can be seen as self-expression or aesthetics. But the word artistry, I'm leaning on a few authors who are talking about the liminality of the arts experientially between, for example, the first, second, and third person, the good, the true, and the beautiful, and arts, religion, and science. It's as if, for me, they're interdependent, and separating the arts as the beautiful in the transcendentals is too limiting. And so what can we gain in our sharing and in our I guess evolution is when we embrace the liminality and the movement and the sort of holographic nature of life. So that's a term that I'll refer to as well. And hence one of these paintings that I did of a series of abstract figurative paintings, where it's as if I'm being lost in time and in space. And all of the abstract figurative paintings that I did had this triad background, but one of the backgrounds is coming into the foreground. So that notion of liminality and being sort of swallowed up and moving in kind of a vortex of different capacities, the rational, the intuitive, the aesthetic, and the dialogical. So I'll explore this term artistry in the second half. So this is where I launched in with the COVID lockdown. This is I gave myself an alias, Tyler. I wanted to give myself another identity, and this is sort of Tyler Central, the garden shed, and just deliberately not knowing what I'm doing. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a white wooden panel that I might get back to later. But if you could just hold that as one sort of initial stage of one artwork in the right-hand corner. I was using recycled wood, but yeah, this is me launching into sort of quite a cognitive dissonance as to a new sense making of my own personal journey by going to the garden shed and not knowing what I'm doing. And in many ways, I mean, it may seem quite dramatic, but one of my first artworks was this self-destruction. And I have been very influenced by this notion of your developmental edge, leaving something behind. So I was very conscious about what is it that I need to leave behind in my own identity. So this is called Tyler is Born. Again, just using recycled wood and no artistic training, just going with the impulse. And talking of impulse, this is a self-portrait that emerged, and the impulse, just to take a quote from the Gospel of St. Thomas: if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. So there was this just huge burning desire to get something down, to work with my hands. And so these kind of artworks came together very spontaneously. And this is a self-portrait 321, just to begin with, quite random experiments with getting paint onto the canvas, and the top right-hand image is actually layers of my journaling diary on which I painted those two faces. But the sort of artistic license I'm taking here is a huge dose of what Dave Snowden will call retrospective coherence. So I'm producing these artifacts and then I'm making sense of them afterwards. So in my first exhibition, I actually used this one, and it meant a lot in terms of, again, right from the very beginning, I was thinking of this first person, second person, and third person approach to even my own self-portrait. And then with a connection to my collaboration with Jonathan, working with narratives at large scale in organizational development, I was very consciously also wanting to work in the second person. So an artistic practice, almost an artistic performance of sitting with people in silence, but with a camera rolling. So I filmed maybe about 50 people over the last 4 years, a lot of them remotely, where I ask no questions and we do an initial meditation. So this has been very rich to sort of complement my my own sort of, let's say, painting, sculpture work. To have this almost, I feel that it's a performance sitting in front of people with no questions. And there'll be some videos that I'd like to show you from some of the footage of these spontaneous expressions. I sit with people sometimes for an hour and they've not said anything, but it's still an amazing experience. So my very first exhibition was combining narratives and launching into portrait painting, and I had each of my, well, I started with the videos, started with these portraits on the witnessing film, and then I took a still from those videos and I painted them at a large scale for my first exhibition. But there was a real theme as well at the same time I wanted to include in terms of what is the sacred nature of attention when even framing this opportunity of walking into a space and clicking on the QR code and listening to someone who's speaking from a place of silence. And I even did this as another artist, almost sort of like a performance artist of him lying on the cross of we all have that incredible capacity of witnessing that is something for me deeply spiritual and deeply significant in the mundane practice of sitting with people with no questions. So these are some of the first experiments, my very first art exhibition. And then trying to sort of put the language to these adventures. It's been so compelling to have people like John Vervaeke, who I filmed, who comes up with a quote to say, art lies between the arbitrary and the algorithmic. So I kind of launched myself into a art history adventure to really bring myself up to speed within the arts. And the books that have most influenced me, a quick kind of taste here. One book by Anton Ehrenzweig, The Hidden Order of Art. He speaks about the commonalities between the id, the ego, and the superego in all works of art. So it's a very Freudian approach, and he speaks about the syncretic, the non-verbal apprehension of the whole, which felt very therapeutic for somebody like me who's coming from a sort of hyper language-based, hyper rational, hyper analytical background. And this quest of the syncretic non-verbal whole described in these books was very compelling. And then even books such as Art and Physics by Leonard Schlein point to how the big shifts from symbolic art to classical art to romantic art to then abstract and cubist art, all of those thresholds anticipated, almost predated the same massive shifts in Euclidean geometry to then Newtonian physics to then theories of relativity and then quantum mechanics. So there's some divinatory capacity that art seems to offer. And then with modern art, when I take my children to an art gallery, a modern art gallery, I'm lost. You know, how do I explain the modern ultra abstract art to the current generation? So this book is fascinating in terms of what is the narrative behind the artists in even their deconstruction, even in their sort of radical challenge of the very construct of art. There is a spiritual story behind the vast majority of the leading modern artists. And then lastly, the anthropological angle. So Art and Agency by an amazing, he died 51 years old, Alfred Gell. So again, the anthropology angle of art has been absolutely fundamental for my own explorations. And so I'm just getting back to the sort of, I guess, letting go of my previous life. So being surrounded by hundreds almost of frameworks in leadership, in organizational development, in economics and social sciences. So this is actually a portrait of my grandfather. It's like a negative sculpture, a framing. So it's called Frame, that particular artwork. And I'm tempted to sort of bring artistry, the term, well, the arts and artistry into everything from developmental psychology to the Cynefin complexity framework to theory U, and then the integral Kin-Wilber quadrant. So these are still alive for me, but within a very broad verb of frameworking. So I'm wanting to take a step back and look at all of the sort of the impulses of sense making, but I'm going to hold that quite loosely for the moment and sort of bring all of those frameworks that will be familiar to many of you as a sort of a collection and observing our own many ways of compulsion towards frameworking.
So, John, maybe
Yeah.
I just take a
Please.
moment to
Yeah.
engage there.
Yes, please. Yeah.
No, I'm just thinking about, you mentioned earlier notions of the soul.
Yes.
And if I think about the relationship of soul to any kind of mental activity, it sounds to me like this notion of frameworking is your way to almost make an object of the
Right.
whole mental realm.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. And that idea of holographic nature is sort of moving through our frameworks, but not losing them completely, sort of coming back to them afresh. And the controversies in developmental psychology, a sort of terrain, a battleground of ethical use of frameworks between the pure social sciences and complexity figures in our world compared to the developmental psychology figures who fascinatingly still don't necessarily have a terrain of grammar or dialogue. It seems to be very kind of binary. Developmental frameworks are oppressive and colonial, and so that's partly, yes, this making an object of frameworks. Yeah.
And is part of the artistry of that to create some kind of spatial modality for a different type of inquiry that isn't so rationally or conceptually grounded?
Yes, that's exactly. Yes, it's very much in a both and. So it's wanting to have the cake, have everything, but really highlighting the notion of the movement, the felt experience of understanding, then not understanding, analyzing and then not analyzing, or going back to the whole. So it's Jamie, your authentic movement and so forth. These strike me as being just extraordinary possibilities of engagement. So yes, I hope I answer.
Yeah, and you mentioned holographic, and when you're describing that, I think very much of the dynamic kind of holographic universe from Bohm of the implicate and explicate order in this constant dance back and forth.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat too. Are these alternative ontologies of the self or the dynamic realizability of the self?
Ooh. Maybe somebody from our participants could speak to that.
Tom, what are you
Any
thinking
volunteers?
there with those?
Yeah, well, they're my comments. I'm trying to feel comfortable that I'm understanding what you're describing in these. So the artwork do seem to be like human representations. So there are ontologies, the different realities of who we might be. And you talk about the holographical nature of it. I think of I suppose I'm reading Alicia Duraro in anticipation for the next session, but she would call it dynamic realization, is that we are manifestations constantly evolving and shaped by our environment as well as ourself.
Indeed. Yep. Yes, I was following Alicia maybe about 5-6 years ago. But it's great to hear more recent terminology that resonates. I have about 4 slides just on the significance of arts in the evolution of society. So continuing here with this first idea on the significance of the arts in our human evolution. So Alfred Gell, again, the anthropologist, he talks, a quote from Alfred Gell: "I considered the various arts, painting, sculpture, music, poetry, fiction, and so on, as components of a vast and often unrecognized technical system essential to the reproduction of human societies, which I will be calling the technology of enchantment." And later in his book, he calls it the enchantment of technology. He inverts that. So these are sort of the tantalizing relationships between the beautiful and, let's say, the true, using the word technology popping up. So again, kind of a historical reference. Anthropologists are almost inverting their understanding of human civilization. This is a temple 11,000 years old in Turkey, which predates settled agricultural societies. And anthropologists think that actually the ritualistic aesthetic was what actually catalyzed the first domestication of crops and animals. So you could almost imagine how ritual is just at the core of the human condition. And then, of course, with places like Lascaux and the caves, 15,000 years old, these caves, in terms of the theories of why they were there, actually, there's some quite convincing analysis of these were energetic and ritualistic spaces for the humans to connect to their hunting and their prey. So this was very kind of there's a lot of agency. There was a reason why they were making these paintings, to improve the success of their hunting. And even taking a leap forward in the arts with Hilma af Klint. Hilma af Klint, she was the Guggenheim's historically most successful exhibition in New York in 2019. So it's an example of frameworking. All of her paintings, as you know, have these symmetries and spirals and rainbow spectrums. So there's something going on here that I'm intrigued about with regards to the sort of evolution of society. And this is one last artwork that I'll be showing just for this section here. Again, in terms of sort of like the hyper object of the climate crisis and our relationship to technology. So this is my reproducing Velázquez painting called The Flagellation of Christ. And I've given it the pillar, the technology angle, is kind of my matrix trilogy moment of the relationship of humans to technology, but arts themselves and ritual, making the term broader, arts and ritual also being a technology. I'm just evoking those without any answer or any theory, but it's as if technology is this hyper object which is beyond us, that we are compelled to engage with. And is there some reconciliation? So, of course, art in the age of artificial intelligence, absolutely massive subject, but there are some themes which are cohering for me to make sense of what might our relationship be to artificial intelligence, at the same time as thinking what is our relationship to the arts at a societal level. So that leads me to one possible video. Actually, this is 5 minutes long. I'll stop here. This is Jennifer Garvey Berger speaking to a sculpture that they installed in their community in France, their multifamily community. But it's a 5-minute video, so I'll propose it at one point. But that's the first invitation to reflect at this macro level, if people are up for that, of the significance of the arts in poly crises.
If you click on breakout rooms there, you see 3 options. So there's one that says the poly crisis in society, one about spirituality, consciousness, and identity, which Rose is already joining, one on arts as technology and AI. So these are just ways to kind of think, which direction do you want to unpack what you've heard so far?
My versions of the slides, the stories that John told us. One about how art helps us build society and can still in the crisis situation. How it's part of how we build our consciousness and identity and connect as people, and then art as a part of the technology process, or this is a tool, so to speak. I have that correct, John?
Yeah.
What do people have to reflect on now that they've had a chance to kind of digest and process a little? Who wants to start us off? These guys will come in 2 seconds now, so maybe we'll give them a chance to. Okay, so now everybody's back. Did we lose one? No, there's less. Okay, good. Tom has his hand raised. So we're just gonna go around from each group and just hear what we had to say. So Tom, you're muted.
And this is my summary. I don't know if it's a summary for the group. It's great conversation, but in times of crisis, fundamental crises, there are moments of dehumanization. That's why they're a crisis, and the arts, I think, are a way to connect to what's fundamentally human to us. So that has 2 effects. It helps guide us to a new order that's more humanistic, but it also helps. It does self-care for us. It helps us feel better because being connected to what's fundamentally human, universal values is the thing that we really want to do. And it's the assumption I have, for example, in the framework of this idea of a couple things that are important about our self-experience that we want to manifest in the world. And that's true in times of crisis, but we can kind of be disconnected from that in the normal state. But in crisis, we have to find it again, and arts will help us do that, or artistry.
That sounds like a good summary from the rest of the group, John and Rose. Okay, good. How about if we just go around to each room? We have the ladies' room, Barrett, Micah, and Uta.
Shall I go for us? Do you agree? Thank you. So I felt very much inspired by the topic of the room itself, consciousness, spirituality, and identity, and also reflecting on what you shared on the evolution of mankind and the expression of arts to the interrelation of nature itself, and expressing it in a very symbolic way. And from integral theory nowadays to integrate and to be with creativity in a comprehensive way, so allowing to transcend the information that we receive, not only from the gross, but also from the subtle, from the quantum field. And taking this information and expressing them in in an appropriate and maybe a quite new way. And also being surprised by what is emerging from this new ability to open up to the interconnectedness, to the holographic realm, and expressing it through us, through man. This is what I take from what you shared with that, and what we tried to delve into in our breakout. Thank you.
John really challenged us in terms of, art, technology, and AI, and really trying to really understand that. And where there's very broad conversation that, at the end, we decided we should just ask ChatGPT to give it the answer to your feedback for the feedback session, because I thought that was going to be easier. But I think Jamie made a really strong point about, let's say, technology and AI and our own agency. So, it's where does this of the, I guess the perception that it's somebody else's truth or somebody else's meaning, so you lose your own agency at some point, if you're not extraordinarily careful in kind of that sense making in the kind of the art, technology, and the AI space. So it certainly challenged us to really go, where are we in amongst these dimensions?
Well, simply to just from what I kind of started with my group is this idea of how technology can begin to dictate the terms of engagement, and how we are, and just as a simple metaphor, the use of the word breakout room, which already sets up a certain tone, which is different than I was in a online session recently where somebody used the word connection rooms, which is really what breakout rooms are. They're places for connection. And so even just changing the language is to change the metaphor, which is to change the intention. And that feels fundamental to any kind of art making, which is really about shifting perspective and speaking in different languages, sensing in different languages, as a way to begin to shift the stream. And of course, I think one of the challenges of technology, the runaway technology that we have, is, in a sense, it's hard to keep up with the changes and the pace, particularly since the ecosystem of our bodies moves at a different pace. And that's where we kind of run the risk of virtual reality overwhelming our human nature in a very literal way. So,
John, what do you take from all this? How do you want to respond?
Well, I'd love to pick up on very specifically what Les and Jamie have just raised, because that was the point I felt I reached 4 years ago, which was that I'd lost my sovereignty, and sort of taking in the engine, which is almost sort of beyond. Nobody's in control of the evolution of technology. There's this term called from genes to memes to teams, TEME, coined by a British philosopher, Susan Blackmore, which is sort of the technology is a living organism that we're just slaves to. We're just sucked in and we're compelled. But my ultimate manifesto with this theme of artistry is that every complexity agent should have their own artistic practice, where they go selfishly into these creative acts without knowing what they're doing, with self-abandon. And I'll talk about this a little bit later if we have time, which is the kind of theory U version in the arts. So to be very constructivist, my manifesto is all complexity agents need to reclaim a personal sovereignty through some form of artistry that is balancing out AI, for example. So it's as if the technology inevitable increase is forcing us to discover what is essentially human. It's a challenge to us to kind of meet the pace of technology with our own pace of inner technology. And it just so happens that I feel arts provide something extraordinary, and Barrett has written extensively about the practices, the qualities, the capacities that you can distill from what artists are doing, and connect that to the complexity principles, the anthropological complexity sciences principles. So yeah, that if I was to stand up on a stage and say this is my kind of invitation and mission is to have this manifesto that all complexity agents need to engage with that blurred subject-object boundary and have an artistic practice.
Yeah. So
As a
I have a
sovereignty.
couple of things I'd like to just spar with you for a moment around. One is the use of the term complexity agents and positioning that within this sense that as you were describing the escalation of technology in relation to helping us or challenging us to define what is essentially human. Sounds very much like Claire Gray's notion of how spiral dynamics, how is the biopsychosocial spiritual evolution interacting with the external world as we create unintended consequences and the conditions come back and challenge us in these ways. And is the term complexity agent then, do you think, a reflection of current jargon being used or current conceptualizations of the world? Because complexity is everywhere these days, it seems.
Yes, so you can all help me out here. I've been inculcated, I've been let's say converted to evangelize the shift from, I guess, our Western educational system of breaking our world into parts to then understand them and put them back together again, to then a complexity way of thinking, which is very much from the social sciences. So obviously that's been around for many, many years. But yes, I kind of use that jargon of complexity sciences with that very sort of distinct threshold between the analytical, even the main sort of political approaches are very linear and mechanistic. But it may be fancy jargon, but I'm maybe too close to it to take a step back. Maybe people could.
I think my point wasn't that it's fancy jargon, is
Right.
it just the jargon of our age at the moment?
Well, I guess in terms of there is a hierarchical connection of consciousness to greater and greater contexts of never before have we been so interconnected and know instantaneously what's going on around the world. So
yeah. What were people calling it during the Renaissance and Reformation, for instance, or because like the book you mentioned around physics and the art, and I see these parallels too. Is there something that the artists are in tune with from the subtle realms before the physicists or are voicing this in a way? And even the cave drawings, I thought, is this simply a way of not necessarily representing experience, but imagining experience to be able to enact it?
exactly along those lines. Yes. Well, Uta could speak to that question, Jonathan, about artists tapping into a field. That's my passion. I don't know if Uta, you might want to. Anybody else want to evoke that, because people like Lynn McTaggart talking about the field of consciousness. I don't know if anybody else wants to make any connections there.
Yeah, I can take it from there. Thank you so much. So what we intend with our work that we invite to is going beyond our senses in everyday life, and not only with artists, so with everyone who feels called to, just to take a pause, to close your eyes, to allow yourself to receive information from the field. And there are various terms, and well, Lynn McTaggart names it the field, so the electromagnetic field. And let's say there are various information, various frequencies, various temperatures, various characteristics in, and everyone receives information maybe related to a certain intention in a very different way. And everyone is unique and capable in translating this information in what you also, you named it, John, to be very precise in what you express in forms or shapes or patterns, but to allow yourself to be creative in your personal, in your unique, in your individual way. So what we intend to do is, with everyone, not only with artists, but to allow yourself to open up to your right brain hemisphere, also left and right, and to connect to your intuition, to the subconscious and to the unconscious, and to allow the information to just to move through you and to train whatever you are talented with. So this is this is a way on a very simple daily basis to become creative again, to go beyond the conditions of our education.
Thank you.
Rose, I
Thank you,
noticed-
Ruta.
Yeah, I noticed you got your hand up, Rose. Is this evoking something in you?
Yes, a great conversation. This reminds me, I actually had the pleasure and the honor of visiting where Leonardo da Vinci was born, where he grew up. And as you know, I don't have to tell you about his life. He came from poor life. He wasn't a very rich person. He was at those times considered to be illegitimate child. But I remember sitting outside of his house. They had made a museum of it, and there he used to sit and watch nature. And because he was quite lonely, he was an only child, and because of the circumstances of his life, um, I was just marveling at how he was able to tap into his artistic side as well as his rational scientific side to come up with, his great works of art and great engineering feats. Um, and Galileo might be in that category, but what I kept questioning, was it because of the loneliness? Was it because he was ostracized that he was able to, from that suffering, be able to create these magnificent pieces of art, engineering feats? That's the thought that came to my mind when we were having this conversation.
When I hear that, one thing that comes to my mind, though, is we often look for, I would say, answers to questions like that in externalities. And I was very drawn to James Hillman's The Soul's Code, where he was showing that genetics and environment cannot account for character. that not for the whole of it. They can account for many, but there's something about the human spirit that transcends those conditions. So yeah, just where do we, and I think, John, you're trying to evoke some of that looking upwards or upstream, so to speak.
Yeah, yep, totally, yeah. Yeah, so Les, you were first with a hand and then Jamie.
So I think with Tom's questions on my other screen here and you, John, talking about complexity, I'm kind of left with a sense of, I guess, technology. So we're in this technology group. So we're in a world of conscious overload right now, right? I mean, there's
Right.
more information, more at any given time than we've had
More content.
in our life. And I'm kind of going, and then I throw in the echo chamber, and ultimately, there's less and less agency because you're living in the echo chamber of whatever you've got.
Right.
So that the sense of, I'm almost kind of feeling that through this, and it was only when Rose talked about that kind of being ostracized and loneliness, effectively that's you coming out of your echo chamber into this kind of your own kind of personality and your own identity. So I'm kind of, it feels like there's a potential to become less creative in the current environment. That's what's sitting with me at this moment in time. Just that there is so much information that you can't. There's less and less agency as we go forward, which some might say is a desired outcome, depending on what political environment you're subscribing to. So there's this kind of dichotomy of thought for me that actually technology and AI and conscious overload being in this echo chamber is making us less creative in this moment. So where do you find that? Where do you find that this, how do you kind of quieten everything down to allow your personality to, I guess, spring out?
Yes, well, it's coming back to my manifesto of a evangelizing of a sovereign first person artistry practice. And so, yes, I feel that we're kind of in the age of the great integration. So there's, as you say, just content overload. But how do we make sense and integrate that? And my intuition is that that can only come through ironically, a very selfish practice. So, and I was very close for over 10 years to the developmental psychology field, where we're forensically looking at the evolution of human capacities and complexity, where you're going to be. So I was out there in the world trying to promote perspective seeking, perspective clarification, and perspective coordination in teams and organizations. But then I kind of just felt I hit a wall. I had to go to my garden shed and do my own thing and not listen to anybody. And yes, that's partly my response to your evocation, Les, which is very, very meaningful to me, resonates a lot. And I'd love to hear if anybody else has their own reaction, but that's my presentation, and kind of these are the artifacts that have come out of that selfish practice to kind of reclaim something.
Yeah, and I'm going to suggest that we take Jamie's comment and response and then make a transition, because I'm mindful of the time, and I think it would be quite interesting to listen to this 5-minute video with Jennifer as a way to maybe evoke another level or layer of space in the conversation.
I don't want to open up a whole other can of worms, but I want to kind of bring another perspective about the field. That the field is not necessarily benevolent.
Right.
And here in the United States, it might be a little different in Europe. But here we have a lot of people who claim God spoke to me. And so as a politician, I'm going to enact these rules and regulations. So it seems like we've gone a long ways from the world of objectivity, and now we've swung to the other side, to the world of subjectivity, so that opinions are, in a sense, in the guise of facts or objective reality, and how do we dance between those two and understand that everything that's coming through us is not necessarily either in our best interests or in the interests of the people or the earth around us. So I know it's kind of like, how we started off with the internet. The internet is just going to be a fabulous place and love, peace, and lovely, everything. But so it's just kind of another way for me at least, to think of the field and how we grapple with that and how we bring a discernment to what we're quote unquote channeling or that's coming through us, because the field, like any other field, has a lot of noise in it.
Or is it fields? John,
Indeed,
any
yes. Well,
comments before we make a transition here?
yes, well, I mean, it would be amazing to kind of bookmark another conversation, Jamie, thanks to your evocation there, because this is my use of the word liminality. Can we bring some aspects of the true, the scientific, the rational to these, in some ways, very aesthetic waves that people are, they feel that they've been called by a deity. How can we bring in a cycle of rationality? But if we go hyper rational, then we get into trouble as well. But so that sort of unfolding that relationship between all three of the good, the true, and the beautiful is fascinating for me. You evoked that for me, which is there's nothing. It's quite extraordinary when people are called by something beyond them. But there's the shadow side of that. How can a process of this holographic movement, we keep it in check? There's some social platform for holding that with discernment. So it's a big one.
Yeah, but let's take a moment here. Tom, you usually have a little infomercial for us.
So has that come up?
Yes, it's not running yet, but it's there.
Okay, yes. So Jonathan, if I understood correctly, sorry, you said we could have a quick round now, or if
No, I was going to say you tee it up. What are you looking to evoke with this? And then we could have enough time to go round with it.
Right. Yeah, sure. So actually, if this is okay, I mean, actually, this is a 5-minute video, and the idea is now with moving into a second chapter of my slides here, where we're coming to the individual, how we engage individually with art. So Jennifer is speaking about a sculpture that they bought and installed in their garden. And there is one other much shorter video of a musician, an American musician, who is talking to the liminalities. So ultimately, there's 2 videos that I'd like to share, but this is
go for it, John.
Spontaneous narrative when sitting with Jennifer in silence. This is what she felt needed to be expressed.
Actually today I had a bush cut down so that I could see it from my study. It was quite an ugly bush. And the sculpture changed me, right? It opened up a possibility to me in a shop window in Toulouse. Opened up a sense of possibility for me that meant I couldn't quite hold my life in the same way. I couldn't quite see things in the same way I had seen them before. That's a cool piece of art. This is a sculpture of a child, a young person, probably poor, barefoot, and wearing rags, standing on a tree stump. And the child's hands are outstretched, and around the child, on the ground, on the arms, on the tree trunk, are crows. And you can imagine a horrible sculpture, the thing that I've just described, a poor, barefoot child surrounded by somewhat frightening birds on the child. It's swooping around the child. But the sculpture is quite beautiful. And the child is so beautiful. And the birds are so beautiful. And I was describing this sculpture to others around me who hadn't seen it. And you could tell in their faces they could not understand how this thing I was describing could be beautiful. It sounded a little bit sad, maybe scary, maybe ugly. And then you see it, and it's beautiful, and it feels good. You think, oh, this is this communion between this child and these birds. It's generative, it's loving. And then you think, what ugliness in my life? What thing that I keep away, that I'm afraid of, that's cawing or pulling at me? If I open my arms and I welcomed this thing because it's the life that I have, how would that be different? You know, and I think about events in my life I really didn't want to have. Awful experiences of sickness or loss. And I think it's not that I would ever open my arms and welcome those experiences back. It's not that I wouldn't, choose not to have them if somebody gave me a choice. Like, do you want cancer or not cancer? It's not a hard choice. But if I could learn more to open my arms to those difficulties, to open my arms to those things, like this swirling difficulty we had with this decision, or like the surprising things that come up from leading an organization, surprising difficulties. If I could open my arms to them and wonder about in what way are they beautiful, that changes. It changes who I am, it changes what's possible, it changes what they are. This is what this piece of art called to me and reminds me of, and why she matters here, why the sculpture matters here.
So I hope a sort of a somewhat meditative moment sitting with Jennifer, and it was one of my curiosities engaging with somebody like Jennifer in the field of developmental psychology. What are our edges for each one of us wherever we are in our maturity on our adult journey. And it just stood out that the art here gave an affordance, gave something to really evoke a powerful and deeply personal narrative, and reminded me of how artists and artistry are kind of like the most hopeful way of being in the darkest of moments. So coming back again to the polycrisis theme, there's something that the artist is able to do, the artistry way of being, always looking for the beauty in that darkness. And so that's why I wanted to show you that video. And then, you know, there are many things written about how artists are always the first to redevelop the most marginalized areas of our society. They're always opening up new possibilities. So I think in terms of time, I'll hand over to Jonathan and Tom for the sort of closing phases. But there would be, if another opportunity comes together, there would be a deeper set of examples of the liminality of artists, how they're moving through the you, they're going through breakdown, they're always having to remind themselves of the magic of their creativity. There's hopefully a continuation of this conversation, but I'll pretty much wrap up there, Jonathan and Tom. If I'd love to hear over to you and the group.
What I'd like to do is just allow a kind of popcorn style checkout round, right? So that we have enough time so that people can take a bit of time to just share. What did this evoke for you? What are you sitting with now? What would you like to leave the group with?
I'll share something that I shared in one of the connection rooms. I'm going to use that word from now on, about being the pawn of creativity. Something I came up with when I was playing the piano in my younger days. That sense of this happened to me. I was able to play it, but outside of my physical presence. I could see myself playing it, hear it, and scary moment because I never experienced that before. But in that fear, in that unexpected, I had an appreciation for the power of creativity and artistry. And so this session, there could be so many conversations that we could go have. Each one of you has said something that I wanted to look into further. But I thank you for evoking that, reminding me of all those things.
Yeah, thank you all for all this inspiration. And I'd like to leave you with some kind of contradiction, because you, John, you just said the artist is always looking for the beauty. And I don't think so. And, I'd like to ask if art is always about beauty, or is it always about aesthetics? I don't think so. I think a lot of artistic work has to do in the end, in the effect, with irritating people, and maybe pointing to ugliness also. And maybe it's not even always about self-expression. So.
Thank you. Yeah.
Maybe just sometimes the fun, or to play with something. And so there are so many options to deal with the world. So maybe that's a little bit too narrow, but I'm looking forward to talk to you about that.
Okay, where it leaves me. So this was a beautiful finish of the whole session, and it reminded me also of scary very moments with deep grief, where I found out that going to poetry actually helps me through that. This is one, it helps me but it's also then evoking what I say or express in others something thoughtful, so that this also opens up a conversation and in that sense connects us. And so thank you very much for your inspiration today.
Tom, and then Uta.
Yeah, so my reflections on watching the film. Well, first on Barrett's comment, I think, yeah, human behavior has all kinds of motivations, right? So you're right, all artistic behavior and representation comes probably from many different places. That's a fair statement. But my other takeaway from watching Jennifer's video is, the narrative, the story that she was evoked for her from that sculpture. It isn't the narrative that I had from the sculpture, but it doesn't mean that it's not so much. It's everyone's probably going to have their own narrative. The evidence there is that, both in my experience and Jennifer's, then, is that art can be evocative of new insight and reflection. So that's my takeaway.
So what I appreciate very much from this initiative is that you speak from an artist as a person who feels being enabled to express the interrelation, the interconnection. With the quantum field. So bringing forth more information than can be done by conceptual work. And it reminds me to a very important work from Jean Gebser, The Ever-Present Origin. You may know him. And in this publication and research that he was doing, he's presenting the evolution of mankind through artwork. And he is interrelating the creative expression with the development of consciousness. And now entering into this new structure, in the integral structure of consciousness, it maybe enables us to transcend our crises, our problems, our difficulties, and to integrate, to transcend them, and to integrate, include, Ken Wilber say, transcend and include, to integrate in a new way, in our daily life. And this cannot be done through concepts, but through experience. Yeah, it's quite a new way that we have to find ourselves. So thank you very much for this inspiration. Thank you.
Just to say, a lot of appreciation for everybody who's here in this forum. I had no idea John posted something on LinkedIn, and I thought, well, that sounds cool, but I didn't really know what I was getting into, and I found the session to be very inspiring, provocative. Yeah, just a lot of content in a short time. So I appreciate what you're bringing forward, John, and I look forward to more conversations. Thank you.
So I think, just to echo Jamie's appreciation, I I often have an expectation of what I come to these calls with, and had very little today, but it was about where does creativity fit in my what feels like a very linear life at the moment, and even in that last video, I'm left with that sense of art, or effectively the provocation or evocation in terms of art creating that kind of cognitive dissonance, and then I'm into kind of the adaptive leadership and that whole piece, Jonathan, on the adaptive challenge and the productive range of distress, and how can we use art to put people in, or put me and others into that, into that kind of new space. So it's kind of, where does art fit, or whatever I see as art fit in that journey?
I was thinking a little bit when you spoke, Barrett, it evoked for me this sense of, what is the form of art that any of us are drawn to or engage with at different periods. And I was thinking then of the notion of the epic tragedy. And my first exposure was Solzhenitsyn when I was about 14 and reading August 1914. And I literally finished it by other cars' headlights on the freeway late at night in the back of a pickup truck, because I couldn't put it down. There was something about this tension between the epicness of the story and the characters with this immense sense of tragedy. And so in terms of what is beauty, or provocation. And then I also listened recently to a podcast, and it was not my first exposure, but my first understanding of this modern philosopher, Zizek, who they say, operates in a kind of very provocative way. It's almost like Socrates, just kind of trying to deconstruct the forms of technology, of conceptualization that we find ourselves wandering around within. And so my sense from what you presented, John, is artistry as a way of almost like that gun and the bullet going through the head, we do not become born until we die.
Yes, I have. This is the sort of the continuation in the presentation, is the particular kind of role of artists in deconstructing necessarily. And maybe that sort of connects to, Barrett, what you were evoking. So this is an area that fascinates me. But yeah, well, thank you so much for all of your comments, and I'd love to hear. I mean, so many of you have practices, artistry practices, so it would be great to connect somehow with all of your work. But so we have 3 minutes, and any closing words? Tom, did you? You're on mute.
The silence speaks louder than words.
Yeah, not to fit into 3 minutes, John, other than thank you for taking the risk. I find that people of substance or curiosity who come and help us open a conversation are really part of the mission we have here, which is to try to knit together a more cohesive sense of the whole amongst all the various different perspectives and disciplines around who people are, and how we are creative or generative.
What I hope is also a sort of a new set of grammar, a new certain language to help us. That's what I'm curious about, actually, is the grammar that might be able to help us navigate the territory, this territory, because as was wrote before, Barrett, you sense it's not just self-expression. And again, that's why artistry as a term interests me. I've got a book on artistry and the real.
Okay.
Super. Well, thanks to Tom for the invitation. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yep.
And to all of you.
Chin chin.
Look forward to connecting with you individually. Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye.
All the best.